right, we're recording. Hi, Gena.
Hey.
Um, so I'm here to interview Gena Thomas. I'm going to read her bio. I'm Leslie Verner, and I'm sitting in an awkward chair that I just realized we had some issues trying to get me situated here. This is my husband's studio behind us. He's an audiobook narrator. All right. Gena served as a missionary in northern Mexico for over 4 years with her husband, Andrew. She has 2 children, works for a nonprofit in poverty alleviation, and she writes as often as she can, which I relate to. She holds a master's in international development and is the author of 2 books, A Smoldering Wick, Igniting Missions Work with Sustainable Practices, and Separated by the Border. Let's see if I can get the subtitle right. A birth mother, a foster mother, and a migrant child's 3,000-mile journey.
Good
Had to
job.
practice that this morning. You'll find her most active on Twitter at Gena L. Thomas. And Gena and I actually we first met on Twitter. I mean, as you meet online. And she had asked me to be a part of a group to actively promote the writing of women of color. And we used the hashtag WOC with pens. I think that was when we first met, right?
Yeah.
And so since then, I've just been grateful for the ways that you advocate for social justice and just give me so many things to think about. So I'm excited to talk to her today about her book. So
Well, I'm just excited because I'm reading your book right now. So I'm pretty pumped
nice.
about this. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So great. I know it can be busy, and I feel like I have so many friends now who are writers, and I just want to read all their books all the time. So yeah, it was great. Actually, IVP sent me your book, and
cool.
I was so excited. I was like, yes. And then SheLoves asked me to interview you. So it was
that's awesome.
serendipitous.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, and one more thing. This is the book with the cover, and it's just gorgeous. I love it. So I just want to show people who haven't seen the book. Were you happy with the cover?
Oh yeah, I was so excited about it. And
Did it need to go through any number of rounds? It was just the first cover.
Yeah.
What's the name of the guy that does these covers?
David Fassett.
Yes, he's my favorite. I follow him on Instagram.
Yeah, he's amazing.
So
and it's cool because that art is Honduran art behind the silhouette. So
really,
yeah.
How did he find that?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Amazing. Okay. So this is not a light book, but it's a good book and an important book. So I was just wondering, when did you know that you needed to share this story and this experience as a book?
Oh, that's a good question. So when Julia was in our home and I was sharing with different people, really different extended family members, about why she was with us and her story, there were so many different people from very different backgrounds that were really touched by the story. And so that surprised me, and kind of helped me think through, could this be a book? I didn't plan on writing it, and it wasn't until late into her time with me that I even contacted or talked to her mom specifically about this. But then once her mom said that she really did want to do it, then it was like, okay, we're going to do this. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did that come about? Did you talk to her a lot over the phone, or was it through your visit with her that you interviewed her and found out more about her story?
The plan was to interview her when we were actually there in person, but that didn't happen. And actually, I'm really glad it didn't. If you've read the book, you know why. I didn't know at the time all of the stuff that had happened to her, and so I'm really thankful that it really didn't work out to interview at that time, because it was such a joyful time, and to kind of bring up some of those things at that moment, I think would have been very inappropriate. And I really felt the Holy Spirit kind of shift our conversation in a different direction. And when I was there, and so just it felt right and good that we didn't do it at that time. And so it was through messages, through voice messages and text messages that we got the rest of the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that.
Well, I think I'm a writer, so I'm like, how did she get the story? Because I often think that it's so hard to tell another person's story, which kind of leads into my next question. In the
Yeah.
intro, you talk a lot about your fears for writing the book. So
Yeah.
could you share just some of those fears that you had
Yeah.
before you even started writing?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest fears was just telling somebody else's story. I mean, like you just said, it's a hard thing to do, and there's not a lot of protocol out there for how to do it well or how to do it right, how to do it ethically. And so I did find a couple of things that was like, ethical storytelling. But specifically for Christian books, I do wish that there was more of a like kind of set of best practices for that. But what I really found was that the best way to tell her story was to let her tell the story and not to kind of interject my own thoughts or my own questions or ideas and stuff. And so I really tried hard to do that. On the other hand of that, some people will think that, I didn't tell enough of her story, or I told too much of her story, or whatever it is that they, want to think. And so I guess part of my fear there is just the judgment that comes from, first of all, from telling someone else's story. And then on top of that, just trying really hard to be, to stand strong when I know that this is how she wanted the story to be told. And then, really just like how much of my own privilege and background and bias has gone into even, telling her story.
Right.
And I just really want to make sure that readers are aware that, I can turn the news off, but this is her life. And there's a very real reality to that needs to be addressed up front. My other big fear was that, well, two of them. One was that foster parents would be like, nope, or prospective foster parents would be like, no, I'm not going to do this because of this. And this was just a very, very rare situation, specifically for the county that we were in. So that I'm hoping that it doesn't turn people off from foster care, but actually gives them better perspective on what could happen. And even just with the other girls that were in the home, hopefully some more nuance in that, and understanding how to prepare yourself for some of that stuff. And then my other fear was really just, I think in general, I am an evangelical white Christian. And so in general, I think that my tribe of Christians can easily look at stories like these and say, this is just, a horrible one case scenario. And on the other hand of that, the other fear is that everyone's going to say, oh, well, I've read her story, so I know exactly what's going on at the border.
Right.
And so really trying to lead people to understand there's a lot of middle ground here. This is not just her story. Other people have dealt with very similar situations. In fact, there's tons of data that shows us that. But it is her unique situation as well. And so trying to find that middle ground there, and really trying to bring evangelical Christians into an understanding that this is a systemic issue. It's not just a, horrible thing that happened to one person.
Yeah, I think you did that. I mean, I think, like I for sure wasn't turned off by, about foster care or, yeah, also I think that people can recognize this as one story. It's one woman's story, but then you had enough in there of, what's going on now, and some of the history of this immigration issue to show that it's, it's happening to a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I don't think the fears were unwarranted, but
they're always there though, aren't they?
Right. I know, no matter what, you have fears going into writing, but also, telling another story in such an intense story. I'm sure the fears are even more. So I wondered if you could give, as much as you can, a pretty quick synopsis of the story of Lea and Lupe. I don't want you to tell all the details because I want people to read your book.
Sure.
But maybe just so people have a little bit more context if people haven't read the book yet.
Yeah. So in February of 2018, we got a call from our social workers. My husband and I had been foster parents for a couple of months at that time. Our social workers knew that we both spoke Spanish because we were missionaries in Mexico. And prior to even getting married, I had lived in Honduras for a while. And so they knew we spoke Spanish, and they ended up, police had brought in a 5-year-old girl to the office. And so she was only speaking Spanish, and they didn't really know what to do, or her story or anything like that. And so they called us and asked if we could take her in for a weekend. The plan at that point was for ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, to come get her in court on Monday. And they never showed up. So we went to court again the following week, and nobody showed up. And so at that point in time, she became, custody of the state, and then entered into our home as a foster daughter. There was a couple of different stories that we had heard of how she ended up, where she was. But we finally got the right story, I think about 10 days in. And we were able to make contact with her biological mother. Her name's Lupe, and Lupe had returned to Honduras at that point in time. And really just recognized right away, not just us, but the social workers, that she was appropriate and loving, and was very concerned for her daughter and really interested in reuniting. And so then we were able to kind of advocate for that path. We had to get the Honduran consulate involved, and had to, just like with normal foster care, had to go through the county judge to get the judge to order a reunification. And so that whole process took about 4 months. So she was in our home for about 4 months. And my husband and I were able to travel back with Julia to Honduras in July. That was another thing we advocated for, because we just really felt like she had been through so much trauma that having some stranger take her back home was not really an option. And so thankfully our social worker office they were just wonderful and very supportive all along the way. Very interested in getting her reunified as well, which was another blessing. And so we were able to go back in July of 2018 and reunite her with her mom and her 3 brothers. Which was really neat.
I made the mistake of reading this book on the airplane, and I think I sent you a message. I was like crying on the airplane, which is always awkward. You're like an inch away from the person next to you.
Yeah. What's funny is that my dad is reading it right now, and he's not an emotional person really at all. I think I've seen him cry maybe once or twice in my life. And he was like, they should have sold tissue boxes with your book. This is ridiculous.
I know. But it's a good cry, but oh man, it was a tearjerker for sure. In fact, I cried 3 times. I was like, every time I was crying, because I knew I was going to be interviewing you. So I won't tell people more in case they haven't read it, but it's obvious probably why I would cry.
I cried a lot writing it. So
did you? Oh,
good
man.
company.
Oh, but so talking a little bit about shifting to immigration, what do you think most people kind of misunderstand about this? I guess I can call it the immigration issue. I mean, that seems kind of too minor, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there are 2 big misunderstandings. One is that asylum seeking is protected by U.S. law. So that means that if people who are migrating up from Central America or Mexico, when they arrive at the border, if they present themselves to a port of entry, which is where a Border Patrol office is, and they say, I'm seeking asylum, they are actually protected by U.S. law to be there. That is a right. It's a human right for them to do. It's not against the law. And so I think that's a huge misconception, because most people think that anyone coming up is doing it illegally, right? So the second misconception that I think is pretty huge among Americans, especially evangelical Christians, is what push factors even push people to immigrate. And one of the things that we often hear from the news clips, especially from conservative media, is that people are coming to take jobs or to take land or, all these different things. And a lot of times like when they were talking about the caravans that were coming through and how it was like a mob, right? What's actually happening with the reason that it's even a large group of people is because the journey is so dangerous. And so they band together in order to be more protected. Especially if they're coming, you know, from Central America all the way through Mexico together. It's a lot more safe for them to be together rather than to be apart. And so I think no matter what the journey is, whether it's through smugglers by telephone, sometimes they'll pay a smaller amount of money for a smuggler to tell them by telephone at different stops where to go next. Or whether it's, you know, in Lupe's case, she was in the back of a tractor trailer. It's a very dangerous journey. And so most of these people are doing this not because they want to leave their home, not because they want to leave their culture or their family or their friends. They're doing it because they feel like they have to. They're doing it because they feel like they don't have any other choice. And when I think back to my own family that immigrated from Italy to the United States, it was a very similar situation in which it felt like the best opportunity for the future generations was to try to get to the United States. And I don't think that's any different today. And so I think it's really important for us, especially those of us who call ourselves Christians, to really recognize in the Old Testament when we talk about gleaning laws, or we talk about Sabbath, we talk about all these amazing things that were implemented in Israelite custom. There was a reason for that. Those gleaning laws were there to remind the Israelites that God is a God of abundance and not a God of scarcity. And same with Sabbath, right? I mean, it's a reminder, don't produce things all the time, because I am enough. And because I am enough, you have enough.
Right.
And it's easy for us to, when we live in this capitalistic society that says you always have to produce, which is in a lot of our personalities. It's easy for us to forget that God is a God of abundance, and we end up serving, sometimes unwittingly, a God of scarcity, which is a false God. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize that.
Yeah. So why do you mentioned in your book that you've noticed that it's not a common topic in the pulpits, this topic of immigration. And I agree. I've only heard it preached about, like, kind of as an aside once.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Why are people so hesitant to, like, read the Bible and claim these truths for what they are?
Yeah, I think it's the same reason, especially if we're talking about evangelical Christianity, I think it's the same reason that racism isn't talked about in the pulpit as well. I think it's this idea that this Gnosticism that we have, where when we say, oh, let's just preach the gospel, it's really just, let's just talk about souls and completely disembody our bodies from what matters. And I think that when we look at the resurrection, we look at what Christ did for us, there's no way bodies don't matter. His body mattered, and what he went through in his body mattered. And so when we think through, like, you know, what are the things that are being preached at the gospel, the gospel in the pulpit, it typically is this eternal soul kind of message. And I think it's really a detriment to our faith as a group of believers to not really fully understand the robustness of the gospel that tells us that our bodies are just as important as our souls.
Right. I agree. Okay. Also, you took a trip to the border. Could you share a bit about that experience with us? You talk about it in the book, but maybe just from.
So in September of 2018, so this was a couple months after reunification, I was able to go with a group from Welcome Women to the border and experience some of the things that I just, I had heard about, I had read about, researched about, and I actually got to go to a processing center, and then from there a detention center. And that was incredibly eye-opening for me, because most likely the processing center that we went through would be the one that Julia went through as well. And so I, walked into this area, and you see on some of the pictures and videos that are resurfacing this time around had come back in from 2014 when there was a huge influx of unaccompanied minors into the U.S. And there was pictures shown of basically children in cages, and the mylar blankets on top of them, like the foil blankets. And so the question is kind of like, okay, but does this really happen? Is this really what's going on? And when we were there, it was absolutely what was happening and what was going on. And so it was really interesting to see, inside of what our government does, right? And to witness not only the site, but also to have conversation with Border Patrol agents. Some of them were just really down to earth and seemed like really wonderful people. Others seemed to be very dehumanizing. And I think it's easy, again, for me personally, to dehumanize them. So I really have to watch myself and not do that. And I think that it's also a part of, this is completely just my opinion, but it seems like it has to be a part of their training to dehumanize in a way, whether it's small, subtle ways or not. And in order for them to accomplish the job that they have to do. And so there's just a lot of brokenness within the system. Certainly a lot of brokenness within the people who are in the system. And one of the things that I think was so interesting is Sarah Casada, who wrote a fabulous book called Love Undocumented, had said something that really stirred me is that there are no social workers there. And when we're talking about a large group of people who are coming from very traumatic events, first of all, from their hometown, and then the trauma that happens to them along the way, it seems almost ridiculous that there's no social workers there to address some of those concerns and some of those issues that come up. And so, the Border Patrol agents don't get social work backgrounds. And so it's really interesting. And she said something like, we're addressing a humanitarian crisis with a national security, response. And that really sums up what's going on.
Right.
And it's really easy to dehumanize when all we're thinking about is security.
That's a good point. Yeah, I love Sarah's newsletter.
Yeah.
Her roadmap, I think it's called, or something. So I also wondered, how do you, and I struggle with this, so how do you stay informed about the news and what's happening without letting like anger and anxiety like consume you? What kind of of boundaries do you have other than just saying, I'm not going to read the news at all? Because that's such a temptation for me.
Yeah. I think there are days when, like, my mental health, I really have to say no to reading the news. And then other days where I am at a healthier place and I can handle it. Yeah. Writing the story out and then of course editing it over and over and over again, really affected me mentally. And I think you can see some of that come out in the book when it kind of hits a spiritual point where I just don't even know what to think about God. Right.
Right.
And I am grateful that God still, wants to draw near to us, even when I don't really want to have anything to do with him when I think about some of these things. I'm grateful that he's a God who also suffered a lot. And yeah, so even, my faith and my mental health can take hits. But I am starting to be better about recognizing, okay, I'm doing okay today. I can handle, listening into some of this stuff. I also I can't always get like the full picture. So I might just need to get like micro kind of info about what's going on, or I need to get it in doses with laughter. And so I'll listen to Seth Meyers or, someone like that so that I can kind of laugh about things at the same time. But yeah, I think, all of us right now with everything that's going on, not only in our own country, but in countries all over the world,
Right.
it's really challenging to find a balance there to say, all right, God, like it
Mhm.
feels like the world is on fire.
Mhm.
And the more you know, the more that it feels that way. And yeah, it's a true discipline to really believe that God is in control.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and that we are finite,
Mhm.
um, but that we can do little pieces and little parts along the way to bring heaven to earth.
Mhm.
So we get to
Mhm.
be invited into that good work,
Yeah.
but it's not easy.
No. Um, so I wondered if you have talked to Julia and Lupe recently, or if you know, can give us an update on how they're doing.
Yeah, actually, we talk quite a bit. We send messages to each other a lot, and they're doing okay. It's been challenging lately. Uh, there was a lot that happened at the border to Lupe, and so she's had some medical stuff here and there, and but the family is doing well. Her one of her brothers is a really good soccer player, and so he kind of lets me know like when he's having a tournament and if he scores a goal
Oh,
and
cute.
all that fun stuff. So that's been bringing them a lot of joy lately.
Mhm.
And Julia is doing great in school. She's so smart. I mean, just so smart. And now she speaks quite a bit of English too. So
Yeah.
gets to share that knowledge with people. So yeah,
So does she speak English to you when you guys talk?
sometimes
Okay.
mostly now it's back to Spanish. When we first separated, so that was about a year and a half ago.
Mhm.
It was mostly English, but now it's kind of getting to be more Spanish. But then when she sends a message to the kids, she often will speak in English. So it's
Okay.
kind of fun.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Um, all right, just as a final question, there's so many questions I didn't get to actually. So people will need to read your book and you and I will have to meet in person so I can ask
Yes,
the
that sounds
questions.
great.
I know. So what is your hope for this book and the people that read it?
Yeah. I'm trying to like figure out if I could just say one thing, what would it be? What would the one hope be?
Mhm.
And I think it really would be for us to recognize that humanity has nuances, and each human being is created in the image of God,
Mhm.
and that dignity is something we have to fight for in this world.
Mhm.
And Christians should be on the forefront of that fight. And so I think if that could be the only thing that people take away from it, especially evangelical Christians, I think
Mhm.
if we could be the ones who fight for the humanity of
Mhm.
others in the midst of everything that's going on, um, to
Mhm.
not only recognize the dignity, but also recognize that we have a lot to learn from those who don't look and think or live, or have the same bank accounts, whatever, like those who we call others, right?
Yeah.
um, if we could actually live out the Good Samaritan parable,
Mhm.
man, that'd be awesome.
Right? It'd be change the world, right?
Yeah, sure would.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. And
Yeah,
we're excited about your book. And I hope that the SheLoves community reads it and shares it and talks about it. So
thank you.
it's a really, really important book and a perfect time for it to come out and to keep the discussion going. So thank you for
Thank
writing
you.
it. It's a labor of love and not always easy for the writer. So
Yes. Yeah,
yeah,
right back at you with your book too.
thank
I'm
you.
I'm excited about it.
Thank you so much.
We need to
Okay,
be more inviting as Christians.
right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gena.
Thank you.